As we look at the book of Revelation, the Bible background today is probably going to be about as long as the sermon. They're equally balanced, I think. But when we look at Revelation, we really need to dig deep into what that book is about. Do you remember cheering in the new year back on December 31st? Aren't you glad that we did not know what the new year would bring? Who could have imagined the pandemic, the shutdown, the uprisings, the fires, and now the Supreme Court crisis? Who could have imagined that we would live through it so well and so faithfully so far? With each new layer added on the rich compost, that is, the year 2020, friends joke with me, as do many of you. Is this it? Is this the apocalypse? Is this the fourth horseman? Is this the end? And as JJ and I discussed earlier today, there's joking and there's an edge of, really, is it? And my answer is always no, 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 and no. Not because the ingredients aren't in place or the timeline isn't just right, but because the very ideas of apocalypse and end of the world are a misunderstanding of this very complicated book of the Bible called Revelation. Like Martin Luther, I fervently wish it had never been included in the Bible, but it has, and so we must deal with it, or it is going to continue to haunt us and frighten us at every turn. I first got a glimpse of this in college in a class on biblical literature. When it came time to discuss Revelation, the professor brought in his private collection of end times literature, books and brochures and sermons dating back to the 1890s. There was something from every decade, each declaring the imminent and immediate end of the world. So I started my own collection, and I brought them with me today. The world will end next week. Biblical scholars' secret computer probe bears shocking apocalypse. That was dated October 1996. Four Horsemen of the Apocalypse, photographed in Arizona just days ago, December 17th, 1996. Armageddon is next. Mother of all wars is just weeks away, August 2003. Biblical prophecies the government does not want you to read. The Antichrist is alive and living in the US. That was February of 2001. 9/11, the Middle East, and the coming nuclear war. Religious scholars reveal secrets in store for you and your country. April 2002. End times are here. Here's how to prepare right now. November 2005. Chilling prophecies from the lost gospel of Christ. Top secrets about new millennium leaked from the Vatican. April 1998. This isn't biblical, but you really need to know. Massive volcano set to blow Oregon sky high. The worst volcanic disaster in history, predicted for no later than spring of 1996. And this one of my favorites, December 31st, 1996, Judgment Day. The moral of the story, number one, don't get too excited when somebody starts talking about the biblical end of the world. But what are we to do with the book of Revelation? If we ignore it, if we fail to learn what it's about, we leave its interpretation in the hands of religious literalists, fantasy novelists, and wacky tabloid journalists. And when I say wacky, I am not kidding. Another story in this one is farmer uses mouth-to-beak resuscitation to bring frozen chicken back to life. So let's do a run-through of some of the terms commonly used and misused when we talk about the book of Revelation and end times. Let's look at one of these slides again. World will end next week. Biblical scholars' secret computer probe bears shocking apocalypse. Commonly, people think of apocalypse as having to do with the end of the world. The word literally means an uncovering or a revelation. And in fact, in Greek, revelation translates as apocalypse. The book is an uncovering. Some say It's an uncovering of the secrets of how God will intervene in the present age and bring about the kingdom of God in the world made new. Some say, and I'm among them, that it's a coded message meant to be used to communicate safely while you are living under dangerous oppression. To take it literally is to make as bad a mistake as reading a news headline that says, say, "Brewers destroy angels in World Series." Now imagine digging up that headline 3,000 years from now, researching what a brewer is, what an angel is, what a World Series is, what the word destroy means. And oh my goodness, a worldwide cataclysm happened in which alcohol fermenters destroyed holy beings. What in the world? We make as bad a mistake when we read Revelation literally today. But if we basically understand the codes and the theme, then we can communicate with it if we should have to, just as have other Christians throughout history, most recently, the German church that resisted the Nazi regime during World War II, or blacks in South Africa living under apartheid. Now, the book of Revelation was probably written around 96 CE in Asia Minor. The author was likely a Christian from Ephesus known as John the Elder, not the same as John of the Gospels. Domitian was on the throne in Rome, and he insisted that his family and his ancestors be worshipped throughout the empire. His father was the very emperor who destroyed Jerusalem. So you can see the problem that Jews and Christians might have in worshiping him. Worship, though, was not optional. Punishment by death if you did not was probable. So just as the Brewers are a baseball team, not malt fermenters, Domitian was the beast from the sea. Rome is Babylon. The Roman Empire is the great Satan and or the great whore. Whatever emperor currently on the throne who was oppressing people was the Antichrist. Let's talk about the Four Horsemen. I've been hearing a lot about them lately. I think the slide is a picture of, the Four Horsemen pictured in Arizona. They are the embodiment of the woes that threaten civilization: war, poverty, plague, starvation. Incidentally, when J.J. reads about the horsemen, listen for the inequality that is present in the poverty and starvation. Charge a day's labor for a quart of wheat, but don't touch luxuries like oil and wine. Armageddon. Armageddon is the term for the battle to end all battles. Why? Because some of the most ferocious battles in Israelite history were fought in a place called the Megiddo Pass, which is the pass through the mountains between the coast and the interior, in between the great powers of Egypt and Mesopotamia. These battles were fought in the shadow of Mount Megiddo. And the word mount or mountain in Hebrew is Har. Har Megiddo. Har Megiddo. Armageddon. Armageddon. Of course, any great battle in Israel's worldview is going to be called Armageddon. Now let's move on quickly to the Antichrist. Literalists believe that the Antichrist is a charismatic human leader who will claim great power just before the end of the world. Calvin, Luther, John Knox all called the Pope the Antichrist. In fact, Luther thought the whole institution of the papacy was the Antichrist. Had I lived in Germany in the 30s and 40s, I might well have found the Antichrist a safer term to use in preaching and communications than to use the name Adolf Hitler. Does that make sense? Coming toward the end, we've got second coming. Second coming is the phrase used for Christ's return, possibly at the end of the age, in some people's mind, I think, to finish the work he didn't do to their satisfaction the first time, to return with violence, to rout out all the evildoers. Belief in the second coming was popularized in the late 19th century by an evangelist named Dwight Moody. Personally, I believe that Christ returned again in his resurrection, and again in his post-resurrection appearances to his disciples, and that he returns again and again as promised wherever 2 or 3 of us are gathered together in his name. Christ appears again at our communion table. Christ appears in our worship again and again and again. Now, some say the second coming is accompanied by something called the rapture, which is a term not in the Bible that describes believers being transported from earth to heaven at the second coming of Christ. If you watched the movie, not the late great Planet Earth, I'm forgetting the name, Left Behind. You saw the scene in the airplane where the rapture took place, and suddenly the airplane was half empty and just piles of clothing and eyeglasses left behind. That's what some people think the rapture is. Now let's talk about the millennium. Millennialism is a belief that a golden age, a paradise on earth, is going to come about either just before or just after Jesus' second coming and final judgment. All right, that's a lot to sort out, but we had to sort it out. So why are we going here today anyway? Because the events of 2020 prompt us to wonder, is this it? Is this the apocalypse? Is what we saw in the last few weeks the Fourth Horsemen? Again, my answers are no, 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 and no. And let me share with you a reassuring secret before we listen to the readings. Even if you literalize all the metaphors and symbols of the book of Revelation, if you draw out some kind of roadmap to the end times, no matter how you draw it, one thing has to happen before Jesus can return. The temple in Jerusalem needs to be rebuilt. Why hasn't that happened? Because the Dome of the Rock, an Islamic high holy place, sits where the temple needs to go, and it's not budging. One more reassuring story. A bit of family folklore I've shared with some of you before. My grandmother used to go to these film series about the end times, and my mother said she'd get quite worked up and quite worried about the second coming and the rapture and the final judgment and all those things. And after about a week of fussing and stewing about this, she'd say, well, I guess I won't pack my bags until they rebuild that temple. And neither should we. JJ?
A reading from the book of Matthew. But about that day and hour no one knows, neither the angels of heaven nor the Son, but only the Father. For as the days of Noah were, so will be the coming of the Son of Man. For in those days before the flood, they were eating and drinking, marrying and giving in marriage, until the day Noah entered the ark. And they knew nothing until the flood came and swept them all away. So too will be the coming of the Son of Man. Then two will be in the field, one will be taken and one will be left. Two women will be grinding meal together, one will be taken and one will be left. Keep awake, therefore, for you do not know on what day your Lord is coming. But understand this, if the owner of the house had known in what part of the night the thief was coming, he would have stayed awake and would not have left his house be broken into. Therefore you also must be ready, for the Son of Man is coming at an unexpected hour. And now a reading from the book of Revelation. Then I saw the Lamb open one of the seven seals, and I heard one of the four living creatures call out, as with a voice of thunder, "Come!" I looked, and there was a white horse. Its rider had a bow. A crown was given to him, and he came out conquering and to conquer. When he opened the second seal, I heard the second living creature call out, "Come!" And out came another horse, bright red. Its rider was permitted to take peace from the earth, so that people would slaughter one another, and he was given a great sword. When he opened the third seal, I heard the third living creature call out, "Come!" I looked, and there was a black horse. Its rider held a pair of scales in his hand, and I heard what seemed to be a voice in the midst of the four living creatures saying, "A quart of wheat for a day's pay, and 3 quarts of barley for a day's pay, but do not damage the olive oil and the wine." When he opened the fourth seal, I heard the voice of the fourth living creature call out, "Come." And I looked, and there was a pale green horse. Its rider's name was Death, and Hades followed with him. They were given authority over a fourth of the earth to kill with sword, famine, pestilence, and by the wild animals of the earth. And today's contemporary reading from the UCC Statement of Faith. You promise to all who trust you forgiveness of sins and fullness of grace, courage in the struggle for justice and peace, your presence in trial and rejoicing, and eternal life in your realm, which has no end.
I think we'd better pray. Beloved God, open our eyes, open our ears, our imagination, and broaden our common sense, that these words so foreign to our ears might begin to make sense and open us to be always aware of and watchful for your presence, wherever and whenever in our lives you might appear. Amen. Well, at the seminary I attended, Adela Yarbrough Collins was just beginning a career that would see her become a prominent New Testament scholar with a specialty in the book of Revelation. Among other things, she believed that the book of Revelation was meant to be performed as a reader's theater. So one long winter night, her Revelation class performed a dramatic reading of the entire book in one setting. Can you imagine? Curiosity alone prompted me to attend what I was sure was going to be a train wreck of an evening. I was totally wrong. It was oddly wonderful. And her other ideas about the book played out as the evening wore on. I learned that the book of Revelation is cyclic. Heard aloud, it is almost dizzying the way it repeatedly circles back in on itself. 7 messages to 7 churches, 7 seals, 7 trumpets, 7 visions, 7 bowls, and then 7 more visions. And within each of these 7s lives the primary threefold theme of the book. First, horrible times for Christians living in the shadow of imperial power. Second, in time there will be punishment of the persecutors. And third, and finally, there will be salvation and a new day and a new world for the persecuted Christians. I learned that night that the book of Revelation is also profoundly hopeful. Over and over, John shapes the stories and symbols to overcome the intolerable chasm between reality and hope. With every cycle, he assures the faithful that God will take vengeance, good will always triumph over evil. Our hope is not disappointed. Truth, justice, goodness triumph throughout the book and ultimately triumph in the end when all things come together and God reshapes the whole social order. And just as the Bible begins with its story of paradise in Genesis 1, the story ends at the end of Revelation with another vision of paradise where God dwells with humanity. And God will wipe away every tear from our eyes, and death shall be no more. Neither shall there be any more mourning or sorrowing or pain, for the former things will have passed away, and God will make all things new. Now, I did not come away from that evening with the idea that God or Jesus would swoop in and save us from ourselves and make things right. But I did come away with a confidence and a trust that God walks with us and works with us and energizes us and guides us toward the good when we make ourselves available to God. When we are willing and when we are eager to collaborate with God for the greater good. And I don't think it needs to be grandiose acts of good. Mary McNamara is a cultural columnist for the LA Times, and she recently wrote that Just as there is just as there is truth in the term the banality of evil, there is also truth and great hope in the notion of the banality of good. I'm going to let her explain in her words, edited just a bit, and I'm going to quote her at some length. Here we are, stuck under a Stephen King-like dome of pandemic-curtailed life, all of us increasingly anxious and angry, which sometimes sends us to the streets in protest, and sometimes paralyzes us with exhaustion and dread. Anxiety, anger, exhaustion, and dread may not be the four horsemen of the apocalypse, but they are certainly riders on the storm that is the United States in 2020. And while it would be nice to think that somewhere, say, the bickering demon and angel who prevented the apocalypse in the movie Good Omens are out there working to keep the final days at bay, this seems like one of those stories that depend on human perseverance and growth rather than supernatural intervention. It's not the end of the world. It's just a year in which many big problems come home to roost. Problems that we must solve quickly before more people die and before the guy with the scales starts whining about chair placement and lowering a day's wages to a pint of wheat or 2 quarts of barley. After all, the word apocalypse originally meant the disclosure of great knowledge. Taken that way, we are indeed living in apocalyptic times. The story we tell about solving big problems usually include a pivotal scene where we say, hang on, we've been looking at this the wrong way. The obstacles we face in 2020 are not new ones, not even COVID-19, although it is certainly a highly virulent version of an age-old threat. But the particulars of this pandemic have forced us to look at our problems and ourselves in a new way. We can't control lightning, but we can address environmental issues, including climate change, that contribute to our increasing wildfires. We can tackle the staffing issues that have spread our firefighters so thin. We don't have a vaccine for COVID-19 yet, but we certainly should have been better prepared for the pandemic that scientists have been warning for years was inevitable, and we can still decrease transmission and fatalities by making, as a nation, a few simple changes together, like wearing masks and funding increased testing and contact tracing. We can't change the bitterness that lies in some people's hearts, but we can and must fight systemic and institutional racism, including in the stories we tell. Unfortunately, she writes, none of this is anywhere near as cool as finding some secret text or a hidden talisman that will turn back the forces of darkness, or killing the headless horseman, or guarding the gates of hell beneath Sunnydale High. Compared with a quest to destroy the One Ring, wearing masks and staying out of crowds, limiting or redirecting funds to assure better oversight of police departments, passing legislation that allows inmates who have completed firefighting training to become firefighters after they're released, raising the minimum wage, making college more affordable, all of that seems slow, difficult, and tedious. Contacting our elected officials, can't we just arm ourselves with dragon glass? Alas, no, we cannot turn back the horsemen of anxiety, anger, exhaustion, and fear, or even the coronavirus by having attractive and differently abled young people read a spell, kill the Night King, or destroy the final Horcrux, whatever that is. The solution to the banality of evil is, for better or worse, the banality of good. A low-grade, consistent, and quite often irritating insistence that we and the institutions we create treat every individual equitably in all things. That's boring, right? It's kindergarten stuff. And why should we do it when all those other people aren't doing it? What does that make us, just a bunch of saps? No, she concludes, it makes us warriors, battling the most dangerous horsemen, the one who would take peace from the earth and cause us to slay one another, with sword, with famine, with plague, and with the wild beasts of the earth, including, at times, ourselves. That one we can stop. Now, I would add, personally, that we are warriors battling the most dangerous horsemen, plural, all those who would take our peace and our health and human fairness and a livable climate in order to pad their own profits and line their own pockets. This is no new fight, though the size of it is unprecedented in my lifetime. The book of Revelation tells us that the battle must be fought over and over and over. But we do not despair, because we know that God will walk with us and work with us and energize us and guide us in the doing of it. We live in hope because we know that truth and justice and good will ultimately triumph. And God will wipe away every tear from our eye. Every tear. Every tear. Now, before I close, the next hymn we are going to sing, I think we're going to sing it quite a few times this fall, and we need to get to know it. Colin and Lizzie will lead us on it. And I wanted to read the lyrics, and where's the page? 413. It was written, these lyrics, in a letter at Christmas time by Dietrich Bonhoeffer, writing from his prison cell in Germany. It's called New Year 1945. And he was imprisoned by the Gestapo, and 4 months later would be executed just before the war's end. But listen to what he said, this outstanding man of faith, minister and scholar. By gracious powers so wonderfully sheltered and confidently waiting, come what may, we know that God is with us night and morning and never fails to greet us each new day. Yet is this heart by its old foe tormented, still evil days bring burdens hard to bear. Oh, give our frightened souls the sure salvation for which, O God, you taught us to prepare. Yet when again in this same world you give us the joy we had, the brightness of your Son, we shall remember all the days we lived through, and our whole life shall then be yours alone. Amen.